All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our webinar. There's been so many changes that's been happening these days, especially with regard to the postgrad work permit. And that's directly related to the backlog with regard to Ircc for express entry and, et cetera, et cetera. What we're going to do today is we're going to have a webinar just to go over what the new rules are for the work permit extensions. And then we'll look at some options for you guys to get permanent residence and talk about some of those strategies.
All right, perfect. So like Elizabeth talked about, what we're going to be looking at today is the big announcement that came first in April and that we finally seen directions for, and we've now are actually able to apply for it. But what is all of that? What was this big announcement? Well, so individuals who have a postgrad work permit that either basically with a postgrad work permit that expired between September 20th, 2021, up until the end of this year, so December 31st, 2022, they're actually going to have the opportunity to continue working in Canada for an additional 18 months. So basically, this postgrad work permit, which generally we can't actually apply to extend, the government's basically allowing for an 18-month open extension so that you can continue working here in Canada and eventually use that experience to apply for your permanent residence. So a huge announcement. Now, for those of you who are who already are in Canada, you should also be receiving an email indicating that you can continue working. So what this email is for is basically to allow individuals who are physically residing in Canada the ability to work in the interim period while your work permit's being extended or while you're waiting for your new one to be issued. So this email should be coming automatically, and you have the ability to use it until May 31st of next year. Now, keep in mind, you can only use it if you are physically in Canada. Okay, so if you're outside of Canada, well, we'll talk about what that process looks like. But this email for interim authorization is for individuals that are physically here.
Okay, so Ircc has sort of divided what they're going to do with postgrad work permit, the extensions for those who hold postgrad work permits into two different groups. So if your postgrad work permit is expiring between August 2nd and December 31st of this year, and you're going to get an email ahead of time to confirm your mailing address, okay? You also need to have a passport that is valid for 18 months. Now, if you, the previous passport that you had on file and your mailing address is wrong, you can update your passport and your mailing address on an online account. When you're going to get this email, it's probably going to be sometime in the September, early October, I think. We don't know for sure, but sometime around then, okay? And then you can go and update your password or mailing address. Now, if you do so, then you're supposed to have a work permit issued to you automatically. So you don't actually have to apply online. You're supposed to have that sent to you automatically. If you can't update your passport to have 18 months, let's say, some countries, they don't let you update your passport until maybe 6 months or so, right? So if you can't update your passport, then you need to apply for your work permit. And then your work permit will be issued only to the expiry date of your passport, okay? Now, a few caveats. First of all, this is the government. Whatever they say, it doesn't mean that 100% they're going to do it. So if I were you, I would probably look out for your work permit and see if it has been issued by mid-October, if this applies to you. If it does not apply to you, then you should apply for your work permit. If you don't get the work permit, you may want to apply for the work permit because you never know what exactly is in their system. As to whether or not you can actually extend your work permit, beyond the expiry date of your passport, like let's say, you have only a passport that's valid for 6 months. Can you extend your work permit after this? That we're not sure about at this point. Okay, so if you can extend your passport, go and do so right away. And you can always apply for your work permit as well. If you're lucky enough to have a work permit that is beyond that 18 months and you have your updated mailing address, hopefully, cross your fingers, you'll have that work permit issued to you by mid-October and you don't actually have to apply.
Perfect. So what about individuals who have post-grad work permits that are expiring that have expired, so from September 20th of last year up until October 1st of this year? Well, very simply, you need to apply online for your work permit. So all the automatic processes that Elizabeth was just talking about, they're very limited in terms of who will qualify to get these automatic work permit extensions or to have that new permit mailed out to you. So if you have a post-grad work permit that expired between September 20th or is expiring up until October 1st of this year, then you do need to submit your application online for your work permit. Now, you may be thinking September 20th of 2021 was a long time ago. And what if you don't have status right now? Or for those of you who have had to change your status, maybe you're here as a visitor, you can still apply for the postgrad work permit. Now, if you're completely out of status and you're still here in Canada, Ircc is allowing for restoration. So for individuals who have lost their status and are now applying to get their status back, normally the restoration window would be 90 days. So you would have to submit that restoration application within 90 days of losing your status. But with this temporary policy, Ircc has actually extended that window. And so they basically said that, look, if you meet the criteria for this program in every other way, other than the fact that you're not currently in status in Canada, you can still submit your restoration application, even though you're now beyond the 90 days, and we'll process this postgrad work permit application for you. But you do have to be in Canada to do that. So if you've already left Canada, if you're joining us from outside of Canada right now, you would have to apply at your visa post, and then once you have the approval, travel to Canada with the approval letter. So you can't use this policy to apply at a port of entry. So for those of you who are able to apply for work permits normally at a border upon entry to Canada, that will not apply here. With this temporary policy, either you're applying from inside of Canada, so you're already here and submitting your application from inside, or if you're outside of Canada and need a visa, you'd have to apply at the visa post. There is no option to apply when you're entering Canada or to go to the US and flagpole and apply that way. So this does have to be online. Now, for some of you, you may have already applied for an extension. Maybe you had a postgrad work permit that was expiring mid-June, right? Let's say anytime after June 13th, let's say if you've submitted your extension application, even though it was before all the instructions and everything that was recently released by Ircc, your application may still be able to be processed under this policy if it was submitted after June 13th and you reference this temporary policy in your application. Okay, so very important, because June 13th was when this policy technically came into effect, even though we didn't get full instructions until much later. Ircc is looking at any applications that were submitted after June 13th under this policy, so long as you did reference this is what you were applying through. Now, one big question that we are receiving quite a bit is, what about, because we talked about restoration and the window of restoration being extended beyond 90 days, of course, a big part of that is also going to be, what about individuals who have remained in Canada and have continued working during the period of time where they didn't have status or didn't have authorization to work? Well, with this temporary policy, Ircc has also actually announced that any unauthorized work during the period of time where you lost status because of your postgrad work permit expiring will not be, or may be excused, so may be forgiven basically when you're applying for this postgrad work permit extension application. So, you know, any unauthorized, any work you did that you shouldn't have been doing because your postgrad work permit was expired when you're applying for your new one, you do have to disclose it, but Ircc may be excusing it, so it should be fine. The last thing about this policy is when you're applying online, normally the government processing fees would be $255, so $155 for the work permit and $100 for the open work permit fee. With this temporary policy, they have removed the open work permit fee, so they're not charging the open work permit fees. So the total processing fee for this work permit is the regular work permit fee, which is the $155.
And just wanted to address, like, we've seen some questions on the Q&A where people are asking, well, what if I don't have a postgrad work permit right now? These provisions are only applicable to people who are in this circumstance. So, you know, if you have your postgrad work permit expiring during the period of time, which is September 20th of last year to the end of this year, then you can access this policy. This is your postgrad work permit only, not just any work permit, okay? If you don't have a postgrad work permit yet, then this does not apply to you. And you'll have to structure your planning, immigration planning, as to your own circumstance. We can, you know, speak to some other programs as well with regard to your PR, which we will get into. Now, this program, there's also the announcement for TR to PR work permit holders. So if you had applied for your for your permanent residence under the TR to PR program last year, and you don't have a decision yet, and you held a work permit, then you can also get an extension of your application until the end of 2024. So basically, what happens is, if your passport has the validity date up until December 31st, 2024 and beyond, and your mailing address is up to date, you're fine. You don't even need to do anything. You should get that work permit sent to you by mail by mid-October. But if your passport expires before this time, or your mailing address needs to be updated, it's either one of those, okay? Then you'll need to apply for your work permit online. And the work permit will only be valid until the expiry date of your passport. Now, again, can you extend your work permit beyond that to the end of 2024 if your work permit expires early because of your passport? We're not sure, okay? So try to get your passports extended before this time. Look out, if you do, look out for your work permit by mid-October. If it's not issued, you know, you can call the call center and see what's happening, but you might want to just double check and be certain. Maybe you may want to also apply for your work permit as well, and you should get it to the end of 2024. Okay.
So some of you may be thinking that, you know, I've heard about all these policies and, you know, they sound great, but I just don't fall into any of them. It may be that your postgrad work permit expiry dates just don't meet the limited criteria for who can qualify for this program. Well, that doesn't mean that we can't extend your work permit. What we would need to do, though, is look at other categories and other options that are available to you. Now, really important, you want to ensure that while you're here in Canada, you're always maintaining your status. So when we're talking about extension applications, you want to make sure that you're submitting that extension application prior to the expiry date of your current permit. Okay, that is incredibly important because as long as you submit your extension application prior to the expiry date of your current permit, that means that you'll hold what's called implied or maintained status. That means that you can continue working, continue residing in Canada while you're waiting for a decision on that extension application. Now, if you don't submit an extension application prior, or if you don't submit a complete or correct application, then you don't have maintained or implied status. And that means that you actually can't work here in Canada until you get your status back. So really important that when you're here, make sure that you're maintaining, that you're keeping your status so that you can keep working. Now, when we're looking at other categories for work permits, there's a few different kinds. There's work permits that are through free trade agreements. There are work permits that are based on spouses. There's work permits for individuals who have applied for permanent residence. So many different ways to apply for work permits. But in some situations, if you don't qualify for any of those work permits, then we may also want to look at changing your status. Or if you have a spouse, the status of your spouse. If one of you or your spouse are here studying in Canada, then the other spouse can get what's called an open spousal work permit. So that allows the non-studying spouse to be working here in Canada while the other spouse is a student studying in a post-secondary institution. If none of that works, like I said, the ultimate goal is generally to apply for permanent residence. So we also want to look at what routes you have to apply for permanent residence. And then with that PR application, which we'll talk about in a moment, with that PR application, you do have the option of applying for work permits. They're called generally bridging open work permits, and they allow you to continue working here in Canada while you're waiting for a decision on that PR application. And on that note, let's look at some PR options.
All right. So one of the main reasons the government came out with this policy is because there's been a huge backlog with regard to the express entry applications. So what we're going to do first is we're going to go through some of the basics about what express entry is all about. And then we can talk a little bit more about PR strategies. Okay. So in a nutshell, here's how express entry works. First, you create an online profile and you qualify for an online profile through one of three different categories: the Federal Skilled Worker class, the Canadian Experience class, and the Federal Skilled Trades class. Once you can get in and create a profile, you get into the pool. Now, very, very important to understand. When you get into the pool, that does not mean that you've actually applied for express entry, okay? That just means that you are a candidate. You have not applied for express entry, have not applied for permanent residence yet. You're waiting to be invited to apply by the government. And so what happens is if you're in the pool, if you don't get invited to apply and you're in the pool for 1 year, then your profile will expire and you will be kicked out of the pool, okay? When you are in the pool, you get a series of points that are based on your background and also whether or not you have provincial nomination. And well, now that the draws have started, every 2 weeks or so, the government typically has a draw where they invite people to apply with them to apply for permanent residence. Now, you can only apply if you get the ITA, invitation to apply. If you are lucky enough to get this, then you can submit your application, okay? So right now it's all about how can I first get this invitation to apply? Now, before I actually talk about how to get the invitation to apply, though, first we have to talk about whether you can actually get into the pool. So there are three categories for this. The first one is the federal skilled worker class. And the criteria for this is that you, first of all, have to have at least 1 year of qualified work experience, which is 1 year of continuous high-skilled work experience in one occupation. And this can be anywhere in the world. It could be when you are studying in Canada. It could be when you're self-employed as well. Okay, then there are a host of other skills that you need to have in order to build your skilled worker, federal skilled worker points. This is nothing to do with the express entry point. This is just, you need to have 67 points in order to meet the federal skilled worker criteria. If you have that, then you can get into the pool. You also need to have enough financial savings, around 13,000 or so for a single person. And if you have extra other family members who are there, then we add a few thousand for each additional family member. Okay, so that's one criteria. That's one category of people who can get into the pool. The second one is called the Canadian Experience class. Now, the work experience required to qualify for this is very different from the first one, okay, from the federal skilled worker. The work experience for the Canadian Experience class is 1 year of work experience in Canada in the past 3 years. That's high skilled, and you have to be employed, and you can't get the work experience when you are a full-time student, and it has to be legal. Okay, so this work experience has to be in Canada. It can't be when you're a student. It does not have to be continuous. It does not have to be in one occupation. It just has to be high skilled. Does not have to be related to your studies. Okay, but you have to be employed. You can't have to be an employee. You cannot be self-employed. And don't think about, oh, I'm just going to hire myself and create a company, hire myself. That won't work either. Okay. So that's a Canadian Experience class. And then there's a third one. This is not very popular. There are very few people in the pool for this, but this is for people who are in the trades, the construction trades for the most part, and cooks and chefs as well. You need to have either a LMIA or the provincial certification as well for your trades, okay? So basically what had been happening during COVID was the government basically had an emphasis, especially in 2021 and most of 2020 as well, in only choosing people who had qualified under the Canadian Experience class. So at one point, they invited almost everybody in the Canadian Experience class in the pool. I think the lowest thing was, it was under 100 for the lowest score, okay? And then the points remained really low last year, 300 something for people who qualified under the Canadian Experience class. But they didn't invite anyone under the federal skilled worker class, okay, or the skilled trades. Then what happened is in October of last year, we suddenly saw that they weren't inviting anyone. They used to invite everyone every 2 weeks, right? They would have a draw. And then they stopped inviting anyone who wasn't nominated under the provincial nominee programs. So we were a little bit puzzled, and we thought, oh, what's happening now? What happened, as we later learned in an internal memo that was leaked, was that the federal government basically over invited people last year, and they filled up all of the inventory that they had for 2022 back in October of 2021. And so as a result, the government stopped inviting people to apply, okay, except for people who had provincial nomination. They only started in July of this year, and the points have been very high because there's been so many people who have been waiting in the pool, and the inventory has been building higher and higher. Okay, we'll take a look at that and we'll discuss that in a bit when we talk about and look at the numbers. So before we get there, though, let me just sort of explain a little bit about how these scores work and how you might be able to look at your scores and see whether or not it works, okay? So here are the different criteria for what they look at. First of all, age. Age is a huge factor. If you're in your 20s, you get the maximum age, but by the time you get to your 30s, every year you turn older, it goes down by 5 or 6 points. In your 40s, it goes by -10, -11 points. And so, you know, it's very important. You can't do that much about age except to apply earlier when you're still young, okay? Education. If you have a 3-year post-secondary program and another post-secondary program on top as well. So if you have 2 post-secondary programs, that gives you a jump on the points. Language is a huge contributor as well. If you don't have, especially if you don't have Canadian work experience, especially now with the points being so high, you will need to have at least a 7 in reading, writing, and speaking, and an 8 in listening for IELTS, or a 9 in all the levels for CELPIP in order to have a chance to get those points. Same, or if you have French, that also will contribute. Canadian work experience. This is the same work experience that I was speaking to for the Canadian experience class. Okay, so you have to be employed in Canada. The work experience has to be when you're not a full-time student, and it has to be high-skilled. Foreign work experience is also good if it's high-skilled work experience in the last 10 years. Oh, all of this work experience has to be in the last 10 years. If you have a spouse and they are pretty super themselves, you know, they have a higher education and higher language skills, and if they have some Canadian work experience, they can contribute towards your points. Provincial nominee programs. Now, it's not any provincial nominee program that can give you points. It's only those provincial nominee programs that will give you, that are express entry linked, that will give you the 600 points. So Zia is going to talk about this in a little bit as well. If you've studied in Canada previously, you can get some points. Arranged employment. Now, this does not pertain to people who have open work permits like postgrad work permit or a TR to PR work permit. You can only get arranged employment points if you have an LMIA or if you have an employer-specific work permit. If you have brothers or sisters who are Canadians or permanent residents in Canada, you get 15 points. Fluency in French, this is a big deal. If you are fluent in French and you're okay in English, then you can get significant points as well. Trade certification, we don't see that as much. It's for people in the construction trades mainly, okay? So this is how you can get points for express entry. Now let's take a look at this, and I just got this last night off the IRCC website as to how many people are in the pool. So, you know, let's talk. So these are like, if you have over 500, this is how many people are in the pool. If you have 491 to 500. So when you take a look at these numbers, what do you need to think about? Well, first of all, I think about how many people the IRCC wants to invite every time, right? So normally now the IRCC is doing a draw every 2 weeks. And Zia, was it 1,500 or so? 1,500 to 2,000, right? Each draw that they were inviting for the last while. So let's say they were inviting 2,000 each draw. So that's maybe 4,000 a month. Okay. Now these numbers are going up as well because more people are applying as they're doing draws. But let's say you have around over 500 and the numbers have been dropping a little bit, not significantly, but they haven't been rising. They have been dropping. I think what was the last number? 500,
533.
533, right? So basically, if they keep dropping, then if every time they invite to the top, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. Last year they were doing 3,000 or 4,000 each draw, right? They were much higher than right now.
Yeah, before when they were doing CEC draws, it was quite a bit higher in terms of how many people they were selecting, but we're already starting to see an increase, right? When they restarted draws on July 6th, it was 1,500. Then they increased it on July 20th to 1,750. The last draw, which was almost 2 weeks ago now, was 2,000. So we're seeing an increase of 250 people every 2 weeks, which is good.
Yeah, and so the more people they draw, the more of the inventory is out of the pool because they're invited to be out of the pool, and the more the points would drop, right? What's your feelings, Zia? Do you think like if they're above 500, they have a good chance?
Yeah, I think, depending on where exactly you fall above 500, it may take a little bit of patience, just depending on how large or how fast they start doing larger draws, right? Because that really does determine how quickly we see these scores decreasing, right? Like we were just saying, from July 6th till now, when they first did a draw on July 6th, the minimum score was 557, right? We've seen it come down to 533, but that's because it's been regular draws, because they've increased the number each time, right? So if IRCC does continue with that, then yes, I think we'll continue to see it decrease. But yes, above 500, of course, is a very strong score. It just depends on when you get that invitation and where exactly you are above 500.
Yeah, and you should also think about how many people IRCC would like to invite per year. Not exactly sure. Have you seen whether or not what their target is for 2023?
I don't have that on hand right now.
I know in the past they've had something like 75,000 per year. I don't know if it's the same this year or not, but let's just say 75,000. 75,000, there's still, significantly some room for people to be invited. Now you have to keep in mind that there are more and more people applying, and getting into the pool as well. But I would say, generally speaking, I probably around these numbers, maybe 470. Before COVID, it was like if you had a 470 or above, you had a pretty decent chance of getting an invitation to apply. Hopefully, eventually the numbers will settle, and probably that might be the numbers, but probably not in the next while, for a few months to settle, right?
Yeah, I think part of that is again making sure that, because one of the big things that IRCC was talking about was that when they restarted doing these draws in July, that they would be able to move back to their 6-month processing timelines, right? And I think they're tempering how many people they're inviting with how many they can actually process and go back to meeting processing timelines. So I think that's a big part of how many are being selected each draw.
And I have to say, I don't think the government loves having the numbers above 500. I don't think that's their goal. I think their goal to be around 470s or so, or maybe even, I think that's their ideal number, which is why they are giving you guys 18 months of the work permit, because they want you guys to stay and work in Canada until you can have a decent chance of getting invited through express entry. Okay, so don't lose hope. Get those work permits, and I think hopefully by in the next few months or so, hopefully the numbers will settle down a little bit more.
Okay, so like Elizabeth, when she was going through the the CRS points, she mentioned that you could get points for your provincial nominees. Well, when we're talking about provincial nominee programs, what these are basically When you're looking at applying for permanent residence, Ircc has basically said, okay, there's programs that are federal based and those that are provincial based. So each province has the ability to create programs to help facilitate permanent residence for their particular provinces. Now, what that means is that every province is a little different in terms of the different streams, the eligibility criteria, the process for applying. Every province has the ability to create their own processes. And so the methods of applying and what it all looks like is going to be a little different. Now, with that being said, provinces have programs that are express entry based, that are express entry linked, and those that are outside of express entry. It's really important when you're looking at the program that you're considering applying through, that you're looking at applying with, that you're aware of whether it is based on express entry or outside of express entry. And the reason being is that for programs that are express entry linked, you get an additional 600 points. Right now, we can see from the points breakdown, that's a huge benefit because it basically means that you're at the top of the pool and you're able to get your invitation generally within that next draw. Now, if the program that you apply through is not express entry based, when you get your nominations, when you get approved from that province, you're not going to get an additional 600 points. And so when you're looking to apply for your permanent residence, you have to do it outside of express entry. And so that process of applying for the second stage for your permanent residence is a bit longer, or it's quite a bit longer than when you're going through the express entry linked programs. So just keep that in mind, know which ones you're applying through. I can't tell you how many times people come to us with a nomination and say, I have this nomination, but I can't seem to get the additional points in my express entry pool. Why not? And the reason being is that it's not an express entry based nomination. And so there's no 600 points, unfortunately. Now, like I mentioned earlier, every province is a little different in terms of what the process and what that program is going to look like. When we're talking about the express entry streams, some of the provinces you can go ahead and make that first stop and apply to the province, whereas other provinces like Ontario, once you're in the express entry pool, there's nothing additional for you to do until Ontario contacts you first. So with Ontario, the process is that you create your express entry profile, you go into the express entry pool, and that's exactly what Elizabeth just finished going through. But from there, you can't then go to Ontario and say, hi, Ontario, I want to apply through your express entry streams. Ontario actually goes into the large express entry pool, distills it down to a smaller group of people on who meets Ontario's requirements. And then from there, they actually go ahead and issue notifications of interest. So basically a letter that says, we're interested in you, come apply to us. And it's only after you receive that letter that you can then go and apply to Ontario through their express entry programs. Now, when we're looking at Ontario, Ontario actually has 3 different streams that are express entry based. They're called the Human Capital Priority Stream, the Skilled Trade Stream, and the French-speaking Skilled Worker Stream. Now, the Human Capital Priority Stream, this is the most general one. It does require a degree. You do have to have at least a bachelor's degree. Now, when Ontario recently has been selecting people for the Human Capital Priority Stream, they're not just looking at everyone who qualifies in the express entry pool and who meets Ontario's requirements, because they just don't have the numbers to invite everyone. What they do is they're not just looking at the who qualifies, but they're also looking at what occupations you have work experience in. And so Ontario's basically selected occupations that are tech-based and non-tech-based, and basically are doing invitations through that. Now, in addition to occupations that you have experience in, they're also looking at your CRS score. Okay, so there's a cutoff for what Ontario's inviting to apply through the Human Capital Priority Stream. Similarly, for the French-speaking skilled worker stream, again, you do have to have a bachelor's degree and your CRS score counts. So with the French-speaking skilled worker, you have to have both your language tests done. There are minimum criteria for both those language tests. You have to have a bachelor's degree. And on top of that, again, they can't invite everyone who qualifies for this particular program. And so they look at the CRS scores as well when they're issuing invitations. And then the final one for the express entry skilled trade stream, you have to have at least 1 year of work experience in a listed skilled trade. So Ontario has a list of occupations that qualifies for the skilled trade stream, and you have to have at least 1 year of full-time work experience in Ontario in one of those occupations in order to first be eligible. And again, here they're still looking at your CRS points. So those are the three express entry based streams that Ontario has. Now, Ontario also does have non-express entry based streams. Now, before I go through the specific criteria, I want to talk about what this process looks like if you're going through the non-express entry based streams. So all of Ontario's non-EE streams now go through what's called an expression of interest system. So when we're talking about the expression of when we're talking about the expression of interest system, the first step is to create a profile. So all of these programs have their own separate pool systems where you have to create a profile. You go into the pool specific to that particular program. You get a score there, and with that score, Ontario does draws and invites individuals to apply for nomination. Now, the big difference here is that whereas with express entry, we talked about creating one profile and qualifying for all the different streams, with the Ontario system, you have to create a profile in each program that you qualify for. So each one has its own different streams, and each of the streams also has a different points allocation system. Let's take a look at what goes into these points. Very importantly, and a huge relief to a lot of people, is that Ontario does not look at age. Okay, so our point system here in Ontario does not look at age at all. What we do look at, though, depending on the stream, job offer, right? So if you're applying through one of the job offer streams, the specifics of that particular job offer, like your salary, the location of employment, they do count towards the points that you get. Your Canadian work experience, right? So have you been working here in Canada? How long have you been working? You get points for the amount of time that you've worked here. Education counts for programs where it's student-based, so your international student streams, they do have points for your education, so your highest level of education, how many programs you've completed here in Canada, and where you've studied. Language also only counts for students, so for individuals who are going through, for example, the foreign worker stream, where you don't have to have your education, where you don't have to have studied here in Canada, language is not a component of it, but for other streams like the international student stream, language is a part of it. So what your scores are on that language test will count. Again, looking at the employer-based streams, the location of your job offer, so where exactly your company is located, where exactly you're going to be working out of, does apply. Location of study, so again, looking at the student streams, where you did complete that education that you're getting points for, where exactly did you study, what city, and again, it's looking at different regions. And then lastly, Ontario's kept the ability to add additional points or add additional criteria under strategic priorities. So this is basically a catch-all where they can add additional criteria to help target certain, for example, occupations or what they're strategically looking for when they're doing a draw. I don't think we've seen this used outside of the EMPP program, but otherwise it's still there, and the EOI system is still a newer system. We've had it now since April 2021 that they've been using this EOI system. So let's take a look at what streams fall into the EOI system. Ontario's two of their popular streams are the master's and PhD streams. So this is for individuals who have completed a master's or PhD here in Ontario. When you complete your master's or PhD, you don't need a job offer, you don't need work experience at the time that you're looking to qualify or go through these programs, but you do have to apply within 2 years of graduation. Now, with the with the master's stream, you do also have a minimum savings requirement. But like I said earlier, there is no job offer component. So right as soon as you finish your master's, your PhD, you could be eligible. You might be ready to go through and create your expression of interest and go into the pool for either of these streams. Now, very importantly, with both the master's and the PhD streams, Ontario is looking for individuals that are not intending to pursue further studies in the immediate future. So let's say you finished your master's program and immediately you're thinking about doing your PhD. Unfortunately, that would mean that for the Ontario master stream, at the current time, you wouldn't be eligible. But that does not prohibit you from doing your PhD, let's say a couple years in the future. It's just when we're talking about going through this program and applying at that immediate time, you do need to be looking to work rather than pursuing further studies. Now, with both the master's and PhD, like I was saying, this is a non-express entry based route, and so Ontario does select people through the EOI system. So first step would be to go into the pool for your particular stream and then get an invitation from there. With that invitation, you then have 2 weeks to prepare and submit the actual application. The other non-express entry based streams are the employer-based streams. Now, there's a couple different employer-based streams, but let's start by talking about what the employer requirements are for all of the employer-based streams. So when we're looking at these employer-based streams, we're talking about requirements on the company, the position, and the job offer itself. So when we're looking at the employer requirements, the company requirements, the company does have to be in business for at least 3 years. And in addition to that, depending on whether the company is inside or outside of the GTA, there's gross income and requirements in terms of how many employees the company has. So for an employer located inside of the GTA, at the time of your application, they need to have at least 5 full-time employees that are either Canadian citizens or permanent residents, and they have to have grossed at least $1 million in their past fiscal year. Now, those two figures do decrease for an employer outside of the GTA. So that company that's outside of the GTA only needs to have at least 3 full-time employees that are Canadian citizens or permanent residents, and their gross income in the past fiscal year needs to be at least $500,000. Now, like I said, there's requirements on the company, on the job offer, and on the applicant themselves. Now, with the job offer, it does have to be a full-time and permanent position. Okay, really important that it is permanent. And what we mean by permanent is that there is no end date. So it is a contract of an indeterminate length. Okay, so if you have a full-time position, but your contract says that this is a 2-year term, well, that's not considered a permanent position and would not qualify for the purposes of this, for the employer-based streams. Now, as I mentioned earlier, when we're looking at the employer-based streams, there's 3 different categories. The first one is the international student stream. Now, with the international student stream, this is for individuals who have finished a program of study here in Ontario. Now, when we're looking at programs, it's very important to look at which program you completed here in Ontario. So qualifying programs are those that are at least 2 years in length, or for a program that is 1 year, it needs to be a post-grad program, which requires a degree as an admission requirement. Okay, so for those of you who have completed a 1-year post-grad program, but the admission requirement states you can either have a degree or diploma, or a degree or work experience, that or where they're adding the work experience or the diploma, that means that that program unfortunately is ineligible for this international student stream. In addition to that, for the international student stream, again, you do have to apply within 2 years of completing your program here. Okay. Now, with this program, one of the biggest benefits, again, is that you don't need to have any work experience. So yes, there is a job offer you need. Yes, that position has to be a high-skilled position, but there's no work experience requirement. So as soon as you finish your program of study and have that full-time job offer that qualifies, you can look at applying through the international student stream. The second stream is the skilled worker stream. I alluded to this a little bit earlier. Now, with the skilled worker stream, don't have to have studied here. There's no language component for this program, but you do have to have 2 years of experience in the same occupation as your job offer, and that work experience has to be within the past 5 years. Now, the work experience doesn't necessarily have to be in Canada. It can be outside of Canada, but you need to have completed, sorry, the 2 years within the past 5 years. Again, here with the skilled worker stream, it does have to be a high skilled position, and there is a wage component where the wage does have to be at least median level for your occupation in your location. The last employer-based stream is the in-demand stream. Now, this program is a little different because there's a list of occupations that Ontario has for the in-demand stream that qualify. So the position that you have a job offer in needs to be part of that list. Okay, the occupation that you have a job offer in has to be listed by Ontario. Now, really importantly, this is the one program that we see in Ontario that includes low-skilled occupations. So the international student stream, the skilled worker stream, all the other programs that we've looked at through express entry, they're all high-skilled roles. Well, the in-demand program that Ontario has includes low-skilled occupations. Okay, now, in order to qualify, you do have to have at least 9 months of experience in Ontario in that occupation, and that work experience does have to be completed on a work permit. But again, a big benefit here is that it's that low-skilled occupations do qualify.
So, one of the things that you should keep in mind when we're looking at these categories is it's not just one person who needs to meet this criteria. It could be if you are married or you have a common law, and the definition of common law is you have resided in a conjugal relationship with your partner for at least 1 year, okay? Then you can work together as a team. For example, if someone is, going through their PhD program and they don't qualify for anything until, 5 years when they finish the program, but their spouse has a work permit and is able to work in different positions, maybe even do an in-demand, job, right? And can qualify for permanent residence that way. We can double team that way, and you can look at different ways that your family, when someone comes to our consultations, we want to speak with everyone, both the partners at our consultation, because we want to see what the choices as a family are together. Okay, so here's some other sort of potential permanent residence applications that are out there. There are more than this, but it'll take us a lot more time to go over this. So just quickly, some of the other things that we might take a look at, for example, family sponsorship. So if you are married or a common law with someone who is a Canadian or permanent resident, then we can look at them sponsoring you. Self-employed class for artists and athletes. This is not a very well-known class, but it's certainly doable for people who are able to sustain themselves through cultural activities or through as athletes, and you've been able to be self-employed for the past 2 years in the last 5 years, and you can show that you will be able to sustain yourself in Canada, we could apply for permanent residence for you under this class. There's a startup visa class, which is basically for people who you can create a company in Canada. Up to 5 founders together can apply for permanent residence if you're able to show that you can get support from an angel investor group or from a incubator as well. We can take a look at that. And then, for you lucky people who are, you have the Hong Kong resident passports, you can look at, if you've studied in Canada, and you've received your program in the last 3 years, you can see if that would be an eligible program where you can just apply directly for permanent residence as well. Okay. All right, so we've talked a lot about all the different programs that may or may not apply to you right away, but hopefully you can do something about it. So what should you do right now?
Well, Elizabeth, like you said, this is really just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many different programs, so many different ways to apply for your work permits, for permanent residence. Not just looking at you who's here today, it might be your spouse that also does qualify, and maybe they're not joining us today, but it is really important to look at what your goal is, right? In this case, looking at applying for permanent residence, for example, and have a plan as to how what you will need in order to get to that permanent residence. So what the options are for you to apply and what you need to do to get there. And I think it's really important to sit down with someone, with a lawyer who's able to go through what your options are, looking at your background specifically and creating that very tailored immigration plan for you.
You have to have a backup plan as well. When someone comes to our office, we provide them with a plan A, but we try to also provide them with a plan B or plan C, because as you can see, immigration policies change all of the time. For example, I was testifying before Parliament a couple of months ago where they passed a law through the budget bill which said that they can now change express entry so that they can invite people based on different criteria. That's not even in the selection criteria right now. For example, they might look at what occupation do you have experience in, or anything else. So laws like this, they change so much in immigration that it's important not just to have one plan. You should have different kinds of backup plans as well. By the way, just wanted to let you know, we're going to sign you guys all up to the newsletter where we send out, and most of you would have gotten the information for this webinar through the newsletter. If you aren't on there, we'll just sign you up automatically. If you don't like it, just unsubscribe. Okay, but I think it's important to be able for us to communicate with you on changes to the law, such as these policies as well that could affect you.
And then when you're looking at that immigration plan, and when you've sat down with your immigration lawyer and they've outlined plan A, B, and C, understand what the steps are for you to be able to actually execute that plan, right? So know what it is in terms of, do you need a language test? Do you need an education assessment completed? And work on you can start working on some of these earlier, right? So for example, your English test may be valid or is generally valid for 2 years. Your education assessments are valid for 5. So keep these in mind so that you're working in advance to prepare yourself for that PR application. And then while you are here in Canada, we talked about this a little earlier today, but make sure you're maintaining your status. It's really important that while you're physically residing in Canada, that you do have valid status. If you lose your status, if you haven't restored it, and aside from the temporary policy that we have right now, it can be very difficult to get your status back, and that does make it more complicated when we're looking at applying for your permanent residence as well.
And finally, we may be biased, but we feel very strongly that you should be hiring lawyers and not consultants to help you with your case. Consultants are not properly regulated. The Parliament has recognized that multiple times. And they don't have a law degree. And so we see so many cases come to us where lives have been screwed up because of incompetency. You should also find lawyers who have extensive experience in immigration law, not just someone who just dabbles in immigration law, because immigration law, as you can see, is so complex and it changes so much that you really need someone who just practices exclusively in immigration law to have someone who really understands, what they're doing with regard to the situation. If you ask them some questions that we've, talked about for this information and they don't know what you're talking about, that's a big sign that they probably shouldn't be representing you in your case. Okay. All right. So what time is it? It's 1:36. Okay, let's do it in 10 minutes. Let's have 10 minutes to answer some questions and see how far we get. Okay.
All right. So Elizabeth, I have a series of questions for you. Okay. They're all related though.
Okay.
So we've gotten a number of questions about this temporary policy and who will actually qualify, who can actually use the program to apply to extend and get their postgrad work permit. So we're going to go rapid fire here. I'm going to ask you a bunch of situations. Just say, let me know if we can or can't apply for that postgrad for this particular policy. Okay.
Okay, let's do it.
So someone who is still a student right now and has not applied for and has not received their postgrad work permit.
This policy doesn't apply to you. The regular rules for postgrad work permit applies, and you better make sure that your postgrad work, you better have a plan, because if you only are eligible for a 1-year postgrad work permit, don't count on it being able to be extended. Okay, so you better have a plan for how you're going to get PR. Do it before you actually go and apply for the postgrad work permit, especially if 2 situations. 1, you can only get a 1-year postgrad work permit, or 2, you want to go and study some more and right away, and you don't want to work. Okay, those kind of situations are situations that can often mean that people are wasting their 1 golden ticket for the postgrad work permit.
Perfect. Someone who has a postgrad work permit that expired on September 19th, 2021.
That is, damn, that's tough, man. No, I don't know that the officers have the discretion to give you. The officers, you know, their hands will be tied to actually give that work permit to you. You can, you know, best thing to do is look at other options for when you, whether you can qualify or not. There are other kinds of work permits, but if your work permit, postgrad work permit, it has to be the postgrad work permit, falls outside of that specified range, the officers just don't have the discretion to give you a work permit based on this policy.
Okay, and similarly, January 10th, 2023.
Yeah, you better have your plan ready to get your PR. There's different kinds of work permits that you can apply for outside of this policy as well.
Now, for those that are expiring, let's say even January, February 2023, do we expect something similar in terms of this type of program, but in 2023?
You never know, right? You could, we don't know about immigration. Who knows? And honestly, the government doesn't know themselves. They're going to look at what the backlog is, how many people are in the pool. They want international students to stay. They have said multiple times, you guys are the ideal group of people, ideal immigrants to stay. So they want you guys to stay. Want and do, I mean, with the government, that's 2 different things oftentimes, but stay tuned. There may be different kinds of things. Like I said, we're going to put you on the newsletter. So, you know, when news comes out that can affect you guys, we'll let you know. We might have another webinar as well. But I you know, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. You can't just plan to think that sometime down the road they might do something. You have to plan as to what the current law is and try to get your PR within the confines of this current law, because you never know whether or not something is going to be good for you or bad for you in the future.
Perfect. Okay, next question here. Let's see. So this one's related to express entry. So when we're looking at applying through express entry, do we have to create different profiles for each express entry pool, or for each express entry program, sorry?
No, you just create 1 profile, but you have to make sure when you're creating there's a skill to creating the profiles. You have to make sure, and you have to understand the laws as to how you can qualify for different programs. A lot of people come to us, they put themselves into the pool and they don't have enough points or they don't qualify for different, it's because of the way that they put themselves into the pool. The system is a computer system that will do an automatic assessment as to whether or not you qualify for different categories based on your answers when you put yourself, you create a profile.
Now that's different for Ontario, right? So
Right.
Ontario is completely the opposite. Ontario, when you're looking at the Ontario pools, you have to actually create a different profile for each program that you qualify under because they have a different point system and a different pool.
Right.
But yes, you can qualify for and be in the pool for multiple.
Yeah. Okay. What else? This is a question. Someone qualifies under this program, the interim program, but they're outside of Canada. So what should they do?
Yeah, so if they're outside of Canada and need a visa, they would have to apply for the work permit online, right? So you do have the ability to apply for the postgrad work permit program for this policy online. And then once you have the approval letter, travel to Canada with it, right? So you'll get your visa, you'll get your approval letter, and then you can use that to travel to Canada.
Yeah, I mean, if you already have a visitor visa, for example, or you don't need a visa, you can just come into the country. You might want to do that first and then apply as well inside Canada.
Yeah, so you do have both options. Just depends on whether or not you need a visa or not.
Mm-hmm. Someone really wants to know if a language test is mandatory for PhD graduate stream.
For the PhD graduate stream, no, it's not mandatory. But when we look at the point system, there are points that are awarded for the PhD program based on your language proficiency. So depending on your background, you may or may not need it in order for your profile to actually be competitive. So it just depends.
Yeah, I mean, it's a significant amount of points. Even if they look at the lowest one that you get for your program. But I would say, go and get it. I mean, it doesn't hurt. Even if you don't score amazing on your you still get a few points, right? So might as well, go and get it done.
Yeah, definitely. Because you never know what the points are going to look like. Ontario doesn't announce them in advance in terms of what they're going to be drawing for. So in order to make sure you have the highest chances, you want to increase your profile as much as possible. Elizabeth, you talked about the tier system and about potentially having express entry draws that are based on occupations now. We know that this is coming later this year. Are we going to be having another someone's asking if we're going to be having another webinar about it or where they can find further information?
Maybe we'll have a backed by popular demand webinar about different programs. Normally we try to. If there is, significant changes like this that can't be easily understood from a newsletter, we do send out the newsletters, but even there's only so much you can kind of explain in a little newsletter. So if there are programs that will have significant changes, we'll try to do a webinar for you guys, just to let you guys know.
So make sure you're getting our newsletters so that you can know when these programs are coming up.
For sure. And I know a lot of people have asked whether or not you can get a recording of this. So we will be putting up the recordings on our website and our YouTube, which is connected to our YouTube channel. It takes me sometimes a few days to do this. So probably by next week, it should be up. And for everyone who's registered for the webinar as well, we will be sending you a copy of these slides. Okay. So I think that's it. That's all the time we have today. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much, Zia. We have a good thing going here with the webinars. Thank you all for joining. Take care, guys. Okay, bye-bye.
Take care. Thanks. Bye.